March 13, 1997, 8:16 p.m., Luke Air Force Base, Arizona. The dry desert air carried the familiar sounds of a Thursday evening, distant highway traffic, the occasional roar of an F-16 on approach, the rhythmic hum of base operations winding down for the night. For the Navy crewmen stationed temporarily at Luke, supporting joint training operations with the Air Force, it was supposed to be just another unremarkable evening in the Arizona desert. Petty Officer Michael Krzystin stood outside the operations building, enjoying a cigarette break before his midnight shift. At 34, the radar technician had seen his share of unusual activity during 12 years of service. Night exercises, emergency scrambles, classified tests that nobody talked about afterward. None of it fazed him anymore. When the first reports crackled over the radio about lights north of Phoenix, he didn't even look up. Probably Barry Goldwater Range, he muttered to his colleague, referring to the massive Air Force gunnery range southwest of the city. Some hotshot practicing with flares. What Krzystin didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in exactly 4 minutes, his understanding of what was possible would be shattered forever. At 8:20 p.m., Krzystin's radio erupted with chatter. Not the calm, procedural communication of routine operations, but something else. Confusion, uncertainty, words that military personnel rarely use. We don't know what that is. He looked north toward Phoenix, and his cigarette fell from his lips, hanging in the clear desert sky, moving with impossible silence toward the city, was a formation of lights unlike anything in his experience. Not the scattered points of aircraft running lights, not the predictable pattern of a helicopter formation. This was something massive, a solid V-shaped arrangement of amber-orange lights that seemed to stretch across an impossible distance. "Jesus Christ," Krzystin whispered. "What is that?" His training kicked in immediately. Years of identifying aircraft by silhouette, sound, and behavior had taught him to catalog threats and friendlies in seconds. This fit no category. The lights moved too slowly to be jets, maybe 100 miles per hour at most. Too steady to be helicopters, too large to be anything he'd ever seen airborne. And that silence, at this distance he should have heard engines, rotors, something. The desert night carried sound for miles, but there was nothing except the blood pounding in his ears. By 8:23 p.m. the entire base was aware. Personnel poured out of buildings, pointing at the sky. Officers barked orders into radios, demanding explanations from traffic control, from command, from anyone who might know what was happening. The responses that came back would haunt Krzystin for the rest of his life. Negative. "Luke Tower, we have nothing on radar." Negative. "Luke, no scheduled exercises in that airspace." Negative. "Luke, no military traffic matches that description." The formation continued its steady, silent march toward Phoenix. Krzystin watched through binoculars as it passed directly over the base perimeter, close enough now to see that the lights weren't separate aircraft at all. They appeared connected, part of a single massive structure blotting out stars as it moved. The shape was unmistakable, a perfect V like a gigantic arrowhead pointed south, each light a distinct amber glow that didn't flicker or waver. "This is no missile test," Krzystin said to no one in particular. His hands trembled as he lowered the binoculars. "This is no test at all." Within minutes, the object would pass over Phoenix proper, where thousands of residents would look up in wonder and terror. But the Navy crewmen at Luke Air Force Base had seen it first, and their assumption of a routine military exercise had died the moment they realized their own command had no idea what was flying through their controlled airspace. The Phoenix lights had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The first confirmed sighting didn't begin in Phoenix at all. It started 60 miles northwest, near the Nevada-Arizona border, where the desert stretched empty and dark under a moonless sky. At approximately 7:55 p.m., a retired police officer named John Kaiser was driving south on Highway 93 when something in his peripheral vision made him pull over. "I thought it was a 747 about to crash," Kaiser later testified. "That's how low it was, how big it was. But there was no sound. Absolutely nothing." Kaiser, 52, had spent 28 years with the Phoenix Police Department. He'd investigated accidents, tracked helicopters during pursuits, worked with the FAA on aviation-related cases. He knew aircraft. What he watched glide silently overhead defied every principle of aerodynamics he understood. The V-shaped formation of lights moved with deliberate, unhurried precision, covering what he estimated as a mile-wide span. 5 lights formed the leading edge, brilliant amber orbs that didn't blink or strobe like navigation lights should. They simply glowed with steady, almost liquid intensity. "I got out of my car," Kaiser recalled in a 2007 interview, his voice still carrying the weight of disbelief. "I wanted to hear it, needed to hear it. Something that size, that low, should have been deafening. But there was nothing except the wind and my own breathing." By 8:15 p.m., the formation had crossed into Arizona proper. In Henderson, Nevada, just across the state line, Tim Lay stood in his backyard with his wife Bobby and their 4 children, watching the impossible. Lay, a management consultant and former Air Force pilot, had logged over 3,000 flight hours. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and more importantly, what it couldn't be. The object was as wide as several football fields, Lay stated in his official report. It moved at maybe 80 to 100 miles per hour, completely silent. The lights didn't illuminate the craft itself, but you could see the stars being blocked out as it passed. Whatever it was solid. And it was enormous. The Lay family watched for approximately 3 minutes as the formation drifted southward, its path taking it directly toward the Phoenix metropolitan area. Bobby Lay grabbed their camcorder, but by the time she had it recording, the object had moved beyond their fence line, leaving only darkness and a family forever changed. What made these early sightings particularly compelling was the witnesses themselves. Kaiser wasn't a UFO enthusiast. He'd never given the subject serious thought. Tim Lay had spent years in military aviation, trained to identify friend and foe in split seconds. These weren't people prone to hysteria or wild speculation. Yet both men would spend the next 27 years trying to reconcile what their training told them was impossible with what their eyes had witnessed. The formation continued its methodical journey south. In Polden, Arizona, a small town 50 miles north of Phoenix, truck driver Bill Greiner spotted the lights while hauling freight on Highway 89. He pulled his rig to the shoulder and stood beside it, craning his neck upward as the V formation passed directly overhead at what he estimated was 1,000 feet. "I could have thrown a rock and hit it," Greiner told investigators. 5 lights, but they moved as one, like they were attached to something invisible. The silence was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. By 8:25 p.m., dozens of witnesses along a 200-mile corridor had seen the formation. Police dispatched centers in Prescott Valley, and Dewey began receiving calls. Residents demanded to know what was flying over their homes. The dispatchers had no answers. Neither did the Air Force. Neither did anyone. The lights were heading for Phoenix, where a city of 1.5 million people was about to experience the largest mass UFO sighting in modern American history. And it was coming fast. At 8:30 p.m., the lights arrived over Phoenix. Not slowly, not subtly, but with an overwhelming presence that brought an entire city to a standstill. From Glendale in the northwest to Tempe in the southeast, thousands of people simultaneously looked up and saw something that shouldn't exist. Mike Fortson, a quality engineer for the Raytheon Missile Systems Company, was in his Scottsdale backyard when his wife called him outside. What he witnessed would contradict everything his engineering background told him was aerodynamically possible. "It was absolutely breathtaking," Fortson later testified. "I could see the outline of the craft blocking out the stars. It wasn't separate lights. It was one solid object in a perfect V formation, maybe a mile across. It drifted over my house at maybe 30 miles per hour, completely silent. I work with aircraft systems every day. Nothing we build moves like that." Fortson grabbed his camcorder and filmed the object as it passed. His footage, later analyzed frame by frame, showed the lights maintaining perfect geometric spacing, too precise for independent aircraft, too steady for any conventional formation flying. The video captured something else, the eerie silence. Even with the audio turned up, there was no engine noise, no rotor wash, nothing but the ambient sounds of a suburban neighborhood frozen in wonder. Across town in North Phoenix, Dr. Lynn Kitty stood on her property and watched the formation pass directly overhead. A physician and health educator, Dr. Kitty had spent her career demanding evidence and proof. What moved above her that night would consume the next decade of her life as she documented, interviewed, and fought to keep the story alive. The lights were amber, almost orange, Dr. Kitte recalled. They had depth to them, three-dimensional, not flat like aircraft lights, and the way they moved, synchronized, deliberate, like they knew exactly where they were going. I'm a trained observer. I know the difference between seeing and believing. That night, I saw something that changed everything. The formation's path took it directly over major Phoenix thoroughfares. On Interstate 17, drivers pulled to the shoulder, standing beside their vehicles with faces turned skyward. At Sky Harbor International Airport, air traffic controllers received dozens of calls from confused pilots asking about the massive object crossing their airspace. The tower had no answers. Their radar showed nothing unusual. Former Phoenix City Councilwoman Frances Barwood received calls from terrified constituents. Parents calling because their children had seen something that frightened them. Elderly residents who'd lived through World War II asking if the city was under attack. Barwood's efforts to investigate would later cost her politically. But on that night, she simply tried to reassure people that authorities were looking into it. Governor Fife Symington, standing on his balcony, watched the formation pass over the city he governed. He told no one, not that night. The admission would come 10 years later, when political consequences no longer mattered. It was enormous and inexplicable, he would finally admit. As a pilot and a former Air Force officer, I can definitively say this craft did not resemble any man-made object I'd ever seen. The formation moved with purpose, following a northwest to southeast path across the entire Valley of the Sun. Witnesses in every Phoenix suburb, Peoria, Glendale, Phoenix proper, Scottsdale, Tempe, and finally passing near Tucson, reported the same thing. A massive V-shaped object, amber lights. Complete silence. Movement that defied conventional physics. By 8:45 p.m., the formation had passed beyond Phoenix's southern edge, disappearing into the darkness over the Estrella Mountains. The city it left behind buzzed with confusion and wonder. Phone lines to police, news stations, and Luke Air Force Base lit up with hundreds of calls. But the night wasn't over. At 10:00 p.m., something else would appear in the Phoenix sky, and this time it would be captured on video by dozens of cameras across the city. Just when Phoenix residents thought the night's strangeness had ended, the sky erupted again. At approximately 10:00 p.m., a series of stationary lights appeared over the Estrella Mountains southwest of Phoenix, hanging motionless in a rough line across the horizon. Unlike the silent V formation that had glided overhead 90 minutes earlier, these lights remained fixed, hovering in place for several minutes, while thousands grabbed cameras and camcorders. Terry Proctor, a truck driver living in Phoenix, stood in his backyard filming what would become some of the most analyzed footage in UFO history. His steady hand captured 9 distinct lights arranged in a gentle arc, each one maintaining its position with mechanical precision. The lights appeared amber-orange, similar to the earlier formation, but their behavior was completely different. They just sat there, Proctor later explained. Didn't move left or right, didn't climb or descend. Just hung in the air like someone had nailed them to the sky. I filmed for about 2 minutes before they started disappearing one by one, from right to left. The videotapes from this second event became the iconic images associated with the Phoenix lights, partly because they were easier to film than the fast-moving V formation, partly because multiple cameras captured them simultaneously from different locations. News stations received dozens of tapes showing the same phenomenon from various angles across the valley, but something was wrong with the official explanation that would follow. Within 24 hours, Luke Air Force Base issued a statement. Maryland Air National Guard A-10, Thunderbolt aircraft had been dropping LUU-2BB illumination flares during a training exercise over the Barry-Goldwater Range. The flares, designed to illuminate battlefields, burned at high intensity while suspended from parachutes, creating bright points of light visible for miles. Case closed, the military suggested. Nothing mysterious. Just routine training. Lieutenant Colonel Ed Jones, a spokesman for the Maryland Guard, confirmed his unit had been conducting exercises that night between 10:00 and 10:30 p.m. The timing matched. The location, southwest of Phoenix over military ranges, matched. On paper, it made perfect sense, except to the witnesses who had seen both events, Mitch Stanley, An amateur astronomer who had observed both the 8:30 p.m. formation and the 10:00 p.m. lights through his Dobsonian telescope immediately recognized the difference. The objects at 8:30 were flying in formation, moving steadily across the sky. I could see them clearly through my scope, distinct craft with the lights attached. The 10:00 p.m. lights were different. They appeared to be falling slowly, which is consistent with flares. These were two completely separate events. Dr. Lynn Kitey, who had photographed both phenomena, agreed. The V formation passed directly overhead, silent and massive. The later lights were distant on the horizon, stationary. The military's explanation might account for the 10:00 p.m. sighting, but it doesn't touch what happened at 8:30. This distinction would become crucial to understanding the Phoenix Lights case. The military had explained one event, possibly the less significant one, while completely ignoring the earlier, far more dramatic sighting witnessed by thousands across a 200-mile corridor. The flare explanation also had technical problems. Bill Hamilton, an amateur investigator, calculated the angular size of the lights and their distance based on multiple video angles. His analysis suggested the lights were too large and too high to be standard military flares, which typically burn out within 5 minutes and drift significantly in even light winds. These lights maintained nearly perfect position for over 10 minutes. More troubling was the military's timeline. If the A-10s were dropping flares between 10 and 10:30 p.m., what explained the 8:30 p.m. V formation witnessed from Nevada to Tucson? The Maryland Guard made no mention of earlier exercises. Luke Air Force Base claimed no knowledge of any aircraft matching witness descriptions during that time window. The flare explanation satisfied some. For others, it raised more questions than it answered, and it would take 7 years before someone with direct knowledge would finally break the silence about what really happened that night and why the official story had been carefully crafted to obscure the truth. The morning after the Phoenix Lights, newsrooms across Arizona were inundated with calls. Hundreds of witnesses demanded answers. What had flown over their city? Why had no warning been issued? Where was the official explanation? The silence from military and government officials was deafening and deliberate for weeks. Spokesmen from Luke Air Force Base, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and Sky Harbor Airport Tower repeated the same scripted response. We have no information about unusual aircraft activity on the evening of March 13th. The FAA claimed their radar showed nothing anomalous. NORAD, responsible for tracking objects in North American airspace, had no comment. The stonewall held until public pressure became impossible to ignore. On March 19th, 6 days after the event, Arizona Governor Fife Symington called a press conference. Media outlets arrived expecting answers. What they got instead became one of the most controversial moments in UFO history. Symington stepped to the podium with appropriate gravity. "I'm here to announce that we have identified the perpetrator of the Phoenix Lights," he declared. The room fell silent. Then, from backstage, Symington's chief of staff emerged wearing a cheap alien costume. Oversized head, silver suit, the works. The room erupted in laughter as photographers snapped away. The next day's headlines wrote themselves, "Governor makes joke of UFO sighting." Frances Barwood, the Phoenix City councilwoman who had taken constituents' concerns seriously, was furious. People saw something real, something that frightened them, and their governor turned it into a carnival act. I lost count of how many angry calls I received. Barwood's attempt to launch an official investigation went nowhere. Her colleagues on the city council dismissed the sighting as mass hysteria. When she persisted, asking why thousands of credible witnesses were being ignored, her political opponents used it against her. In the next election, Barwood lost her council seat. The Phoenix Lights had claimed its first political casualty, but the governor's mockery would eventually come back to haunt him. In 2007, 10 years after the incident and long after leaving office, Fife Symington made a stunning confession at a National Press Club event in Washington. Standing before former military officers and government officials discussing UFO encounters, Symington admitted the truth. "I witnessed a massive delta-shaped craft silently navigate over Squaw Peak, a mountain range in Phoenix," Symington stated, his voice measured and serious. "It was truly breathtaking. As a pilot and former Air Force officer, I can definitively say this craft did not resemble any man-made object I'd ever seen. It was enormous and inexplicable, The former governor revealed that he'd ordered his Department of Public Safety to investigate, but they found nothing. He'd contacted the commander at Luke Air Force Base, who claimed no knowledge of military exercises that night. "I never wanted to ridicule or debunk what people had seen," Symington explained. "The press conference was an attempt to calm public fear, but it backfired. I should have taken it seriously from the beginning." The admission was startling, but it explained much. The governor himself had witnessed the phenomenon, knew it was real, yet had publicly ridiculed it. Why? Symington hinted at pressure from federal authorities, who wanted the story to die quietly. "There's a tendency in government to want these things to go away," he said carefully, "to not create panic or questions that can't be answered." Dr. Lynn Keaty, who had spent years documenting the case, finally felt vindicated. The governor's confession confirmed what we knew all along. This was real. It was significant, and it was deliberately downplayed. Her documentary, The Phoenix Lights, compiled hundreds of witness testimonies, analyzed video footage, and exposed the inconsistencies in official explanations. The most damning evidence came from radar data, or rather, the absence of it. The FAA claimed nothing unusual appeared on radar that night, but witnesses included commercial pilots, air traffic controllers, and military personnel who understood radar systems. They asked uncomfortable questions. How could something a mile wide flying at low altitude through controlled airspace leave no radar signature? Either the radar failed catastrophically, which no one reported, or something was deliberately not being disclosed. On March 13, 2024, hundreds of people gathered in Phoenix to commemorate the 27th anniversary of the lights. Among them were original witnesses, now graying and weathered, still carrying the weight of what they'd seen that desert night in 1997. The years had not diminished their certainty. If anything, time had only strengthened their conviction that something extraordinary had occurred, something that still defies explanation. What we know definitively is this. Between 7:55 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. on March 13, 1997, thousands of credible witnesses across a 300-mile corridor reported seeing anomalous lights in the Arizona sky. The witnesses included police officers, pilots, military personnel, doctors, engineers, and elected officials. Their descriptions were remarkably consistent. Massive V-shaped formation, amber lights, complete silence, movement that defied conventional aircraft capabilities. We know that at least two distinct events occurred that night. The first, the 8:30 p.m. V formation that traversed from Nevada to Tucson, remains completely unexplained. The second, the 10:00 p.m. stationary lights over the Estrella Mountains, might have been military flares, though even this explanation has significant problems with timing, duration, and witness testimony. We know that multiple agencies, the Air Force, FAA, NORAD, claimed no knowledge of unusual activity, despite thousands of eyewitnesses and dozens of videos. We know the governor witnessed it himself, but publicly mocked it before admitting the truth a decade later. We know that official explanations focused exclusively on the 10:00 p.m. event, while ignoring the earlier, more significant sighting witnessed by exponentially more people. What remains unexplained is everything that matters. Tim Lay, the former Air Force pilot who watched the formation pass over Henderson, Nevada, never wavered in his account. Until his death in 2018, he maintained that what he saw was beyond any human technology he understood. "I've flown everything from Cessnas to military jets," he told an interviewer in 2015. "I know aircraft. What I saw that night wasn't ours, and I don't think it was anyone else's on this planet either." Mike Fortson, the Raytheon engineer, subjected his own video footage to rigorous analysis. He calculated size, speed, and distance using multiple reference points. His conclusion: if this was a conventional aircraft formation, they were flying in a configuration that violates every principle of aerodynamics and formation flying I've ever studied. The spacing was too precise, the speed too slow for fixed-wing aircraft, the silence impossible for anything using conventional propulsion. The Phoenix Lights incident holds a unique place in UFO history for one undeniable reason: the sheer number of credible witnesses. This wasn't a lone observer on a dark road. This wasn't grainy footage from an unreliable source. This was thousands of people, including trained observers with technical expertise, seeing the same thing from different locations over a 3-hour period. Dr. Lynn Kitei, now in her 70s, continues to speak about that night. "I didn't believe in UFOs before March 13th, she admits. I was a scientist, a physician trained in evidence-based medicine, but I'm also trained to trust credible observations. When thousands of credible people report the same phenomenon, you don't dismiss it. You investigate it. And the investigation has never happened, not really. The cultural impact on Arizona was profound. The Phoenix Lights became part of the state's identity, referenced in local media, commemorated annually, debated endlessly. But beyond regional significance, the case forced a larger question that remains unanswered. If something this large, this witnessed, this documented can be officially ignored, what else might be flying through our skies unacknowledged? In 2020, the U.S. government began officially acknowledging UAPs, unidentified, aerial phenomena, releasing videos and admitting that objects with extraordinary flight characteristics have been repeatedly observed by military personnel. Former Navy pilots testified before Congress about encounters with craft displaying impossible acceleration and maneuverability. The stigma around reporting such encounters has slowly lifted, yet the Phoenix Lights remain officially unexplained. No government agency has ever conducted a comprehensive public investigation. The Air Force's flare explanation for the 10 p.m. event stands as the only official comment, an explanation that addresses perhaps 10% of what actually occurred that night.